Hey, my name is Jesse Wolstenholme. I'm in, actually, I forget what section, but I decided to do for my research topic the temple endowment. Um, and I chose this because I wanted to learn more about the endowment and temple ordinances specifically because I knew that I was going to be receiving my endowment at some point towards the end of the semester in preparation for my mission. I wanted to learn more about that sacred ceremony as well as be prepared for it when it came time to make those covenants myself. And I also wanted to be able to continue learning about them even after I received them if I ended up doing so, which before the semester ended, which ended up happening. Oh, forgot to change the slide. So I wanted to prepare and I wanted to learn. First skill that I used in my research was the past is different skill. This was an important skill to remember as I was studying the temple ordinances such as the initiatory endowment, because our best historical sources for the ordinance's origins come from the Old Testament with the Israelites in the tabernacle. However, they had vastly different well of knowledge to draw from, and we sometimes take for granted how much more we know now than we did back then. With Temple Covenants, we now get to see how everything points us to Christ and how the ordinances back then did as well. But Christ wouldn't come until roughly 1,000 years after the Israelites worshipped in the tabernacle, and their knowledge of him was very limited. What's more is that they had just been in slavery to the Egyptians for 400 years and had much of their culture still ingrained in their psyche. I had to remember that as I was going to receive my endowment, or I had to remember that because the manner in which I was going to receive my endowment was going to be very different than the way Aaron did in the tabernacle at the time of the Israelites' wanderings in the wilderness. Next one I did was discerning doctrine, and this one was also really key for the endowment, and specifically because it was a little bit tougher in placing it. In the end, I went with that the endowment does fall in the core doctrine category because the endowment hasn't been accessible to all his people since the creation of the world, with the example being the Israelites, they were only the only people who really received the endowment were the high priests in the temple or in the tabernacle. But um, has always been instituted in some form among God's people. And we know through latter-day revelation that it's one of the saving ordinances required to enter the highest degree of celestial glory. That's why we perform these ordinances for the dead. They need those ordinances even if it wasn't available to them in their lifetime. The endowment teaches us essential things about the plan of salvation, grants us power from God to further understand and accomplish His work. And this goes with the harmonized scriptures level of doctrine. And some sources I found to support that include Hebrews 9, which talks about the ordinances in the tabernacle, Abraham 1, verse 2, which talks a little bit, it's kind of vague, but it talks about Abraham seeking the blessings of the priesthood, which kind of go hand in hand with the endowment. Mark 9, verse 2 through 10, which talks about the transfiguration on the Mount, and D&C 110, chapter 9, or verse 9, which talks about the endowment in the latter days. Another skill I used was to be patient with the Lord, myself, and others. I had to be patient with, I had to be patient with, I had to be very patient as I was researching the endowment, as there isn't much historical information on it. And what little there is usually just kind of mentioned that the covenants happened in the endowment house or the temple. These things were also written by people who weren't really writing for the express purpose of informing me about the covenants I was preparing to make. Even in Nauvoo, the endowment was something that was only administered to a few choice souls for the first year, and it was kept very secret or sacred. We don't have much information on what it looked like until it was written out by the First Presidency and Quorum of the 12 Apostles in the days of Brigham Young. I had to be patient with these people for not writing much information down. With the Lord as I prepared to make those covenants myself and scheduled appointments, and had a little bit of difficulty doing so. And I needed to be patient with myself as I learned about the ordinances little by little as my life progresses. Uh, they are a deep subject that I expect only God knows the full extent of. I will always be learning about them, and not everything about them will require patience, and not knowing everything about them will require patience. I also use the skill epistemologies. Temple ordinances are different from almost everything else we do in the church, so it was important to me for me to look through the right lenses as I was searching these ordinances in preparation to receive them and make the covenants that went with them. In my research and preparation stages, I found myself reading through a lens of spiritual curiosity and excitement. The excitement I had while learning about the covenants I would shortly be making allowed me to absorb that information in kind of greater abundance as the Holy Ghost carried it deep into my heart. Each time that I attended the temple prep class, I found myself thinking about symbolism in everything that we do at the temple. The initiatory and endowment ordinances involve elements that may have been unnerving to me had I not looked at them through a spiritual lens, remembering that it all points to our relationship with God and Jesus Christ. One of the last, or one of the another skill I used was that truth is one great whole. Um, a sometimes commonly held belief about the initiatory ordinance was that you have to be naked for the washings and anointings, and understandably, this could give people some anxieties about the ordinance. However, by looking at the whole picture of what the initiatory ordinance is, and with a little bit of clarification in my temple prep class about how it's just a couple drops of water and oil on your head, those anxieties were realized to be unfounded, and the more I readily focused on the covenants themselves rather than the method of making them. Another great example of applying the truth is one great whole principle is the temple garments. I covenanted to wear them when I received my endowment. Taking the garments out of context, people may see them as restricting, hot, unnecessary, weird, or even kind of cult-like. However, because I was able to look at the whole truth of the endowment, I know that these garments are meant to be a constant reminder of Jesus Christ for me as I symbolically take him and his name upon me. I covenanted to wear them, and in turn God grants me the endowment of power and its added protection of the Spirit. I also receive a constant reminder of my divine identity as a child of God and of the covenant. To kind of go along with that, I had to overcome a couple of binaries as I was preparing to receive my endowment, particularly with the signs and tokens that you perform in the temple. I cannot reveal them, but it's okay to kind of acknowledge their existence. We did it a couple of times in the temple prep class. Having grown up reading the Book of Mormon and hearing about the Gadian Anton robbers, signs and tokens had always seemed like something evil associated with secret combinations. I didn't really think that they could pertain to things of righteousness. Understandably, it was a tough pill to swallow when I found out that I'd be performing signs and tokens in the temple. The teachings I've heard about how Satan tries to make things of righteousness came to mind, though, as I found out that the endowment lost my place. As I found out that through the endowment, that the signs we perform in the temple predate the world and the first secret combinations with Cain's murder of Abel. This helped me to overcome this binary and remember that many things in and of themselves aren't good or evil, but how they are used is where those lines are drawn. Technology is another good example of that. The final skill I had to use was acting in faith. Despite all I did to learn and prepare, there was still parts of the endowments that were a little bit foreign to me. It was in these moments, such as where the video instructed us on how I was to make the covenant being presented, where I realized that I was ready, that I needed to take a step of faith. In the moment of making those covenants, I wasn't sure whether I was ready to keep them. I said yes and made those covenants, hoping and believing that I would come to know and learn to keep them better. Now looking back, I can say that the moment right before I said yes was my act of faith. Having made those covenants, I feel his power more abundantly in my life, and I see how he has blessed me with strength to keep them. The Lord qualifies the called, is what's often said, not calls the qualified. I may not have been completely ready when I walked into the Rexburg Temple, but I emerged clothed with the strength to live a more consecrated life to the Lord. Due to the nature of how I approached my topic, there wasn't really a question to be answered about the endowment, but I can bear my testimony about what I've learned. The endowment is an ordinance predating the earth that grants us knowledge, strength, and power as we keep the covenants contained therein. It has been administered in every dispensation where God has had a people on the earth and is essential to our exaltation. Everything about the endowment points to our Father in heaven and our elder brother Jesus Christ. We learn more about our relationship with him and and make covenants to live in a manner that will allow God to have a greater influence in our life. Since I've received mine, I've felt that influence tremendously. I don't just feel his presence in my life. I hear his guidance, and that makes all the difference in the world.